Ground control to Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom. Take your protein pills and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control 9, to Major Tom. 8, 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. 3, 2. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirt you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in a most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie. Look out your window, I can see his light. If we can sparkle, he may land tonight. Don't tell your papa, or he'll get us locked up inside. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me, let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie. Starman waiting in the sky. He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'd blow our minds. There's a starman waiting in the sky. He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told let the children lose it, let the children use it, let all the children boogie.
That conference. We're truly honored to have some of the amazing speakers that we have had this weekend, including Graham Hancock and the incredible Richard C. Hoagland. Richard C. Hoagland is a scientist, a visionary, and an author. He is, in our opinion, one of the most brilliant voices on the planet today. And the information that he is about to provide is absolutely amazing, utterly astonishing.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all again. We were here last year, and it is great to be back this year. A long drive, but well worth it. Let's see. I'm sure there must be some people here that are not familiar with Richard C. Hoagland, so I'll give you a little bit of background about him. He was Walter Cronkite's science advisor during the missions to the moon, and he was a NASA consultant. He's also the recipient of the Angstrom Medal for Excellence in Science. Richard is the science advisor to Coast AM and author of Monuments of Mars, A City on the Edge of Forever, as well as authoring Dark Mission with Mike Barra, and more good things in the works. But tonight, this is a major, major break in information and reporting, and you have no idea how much time it took to put all of this together. When I tell you months, literally months. And it's worth the wait, because it is truly incredible what we are looking at. This is the Chinese Year of the Horse, and they are out of the gates. They have made miracles right there in plain sight for everybody to see. And Richard will take you step by step to interpret this. But you're going to see you really won't need that much interpretation, because if you just shift gears a little bit and look, you'll go, it's right there in plain sight. So without further ado, here's Richard.
Ago, the Chinese have done something astonishing. And what's even more astonishing is they haven't told anybody yet what they've done. What they've done is to take pictures on the moon with their Chang 3 lander and Jade Rabbit rover, and we'll explain those terms in a couple of minutes. And they have put them out on official Chinese websites all over the world, showing astonishing realities that have confirmed everything that we have seen looking at the NASA data for the last 30, 40 years. And they haven't said a word. They haven't held a press conference. They haven't announced that they found something stunning or confirmed something stunning. They have simply put it out there almost as if this is a social media experiment designed to see who understands what they're seeing. Now, I'm going to save the political interpretations and analysis and some of the thoughts we've had, toward the end, because what I want to do is I want to get to the good stuff, which is to show you what they have photographed and telemetered back to Earth from these two little robots that they've landed for the first time in a place called Mare Imbrium. So with that as prologue, this is the Chinese unmanned lunar lander called Chang 3. Chang is the Chinese goddess of the moon, and we'll explain some of the mythology behind that momentarily. This thing is about a third the size of the Apollo lunar module, but without anything around it to judge scale, except maybe for this obligatory national insignia. You can't really tell how big it is, but it's big. It weighed 2,600 pounds. That included, I believe, the rover. And it was automatically landed by computer control for the first time by the Chinese on December 14th, 2013. Well, as Robin intimated again, I've been working almost around the clock for a long time to try to figure out what were they up to. What were the Chinese trying to do by putting out extraordinary data and not calling attention to it? I mean, that's very non-dogmatic and non-propagandistic and non-everything that we have come to expect from, the Chinese communists, which intimated to me that what we're dealing with is a power structure inside the Chinese government which is not what you and I would recognize as modern Chinese political philosophy. This seems to have much more to do with a slow drip of information to get people sensitized to when the announcement is made. The social media in the 21st century of electronics, the internet, the web, Twitter, which in Chinese is called Weibo for some reason, all of these tools for getting information out to people uncensored have come into play in terms of what the Chinese have done. So let me begin by showing you a graphic here. This is Cheng, an artist's conception, obviously. And this guy in the background is Jade Rabbit. When Cheng was banished to the moon eons ago, and there's a long story that goes with that I won't get into because it won't take us to the data and we need to take a look at the data, she was banished with one living soul other than herself in the mythologies, and that was this very special bunny, this rabbit, who spends all his time concocting elixirs of immortality on the moon. Now, if you've been watching what we have been looking at for the last 20, 30 years, painstakingly trying to put together a mosaic of what is really out there in the solar system, apart from what we're told is in the solar system, which is not exactly what is really there. What's interesting is that the Chinese apparently are dipping deeply into their own mythology to craft this mission, both in terms of the names of the protagonists and in terms of some of the things that are going to be made possible by what the Chinese have now gone to the moon and confirmed. This is the Chinese goddess's moon palace. In fact, I saw a news squib a couple of days ago from the official Chinese news agency. The Chinese are planning, ultimately, a human mission, actually a human expedition culminating in a lunar base, a lunar colony, and they're calling it Moon Palace 1. They're going to call it that. They haven't, done any of this yet, but they published some interesting plans based on what you can see of the data coming back from this mission, which is taking wild excursions, I can see. So I would all call your attention to this screen. This is Jade Rabbit. In fact, if you look very carefully, you can see in the so-called man in the moon outlines of the ancient Maria, the waterless seas of the moon, a figure outlined. In the Western tradition, we call it the man in the moon. Very chauvinistic. In the Eastern tradition, for some interesting reason, it is connected to a bunny rabbit. And the mythology of what the rabbit is doing on the moon gets back to the idea of immortality, unlimited potentials, all those things that are connected to the civilization that we now believe, based on this data, the Chinese have very obligingly confirmed once existed on the lunar surface. This is the first official image that was taken from the lander of the rabbit. I'm sorry, the second image. And this, in fact, is Jade Rabbit moving south from the landed position of Chang 3. And as you can see, the website which allows us to see this is from the People's Liberation Army. Now, the People's Liberation Army is the rock foundation on which modern China is built. Without the PLA, without Mao Zedong, without all of that history, the China of today would not exist. So what I thought was really striking is that this data was first communicated to the West, to the rest of the world, not through one of the Chinese news agencies, which are also Chinese government, but they don't have the lineal history and the gravitas of the Chinese army. But the fact is that when we come back to this image in a little while, you are going to be amazed at what the Chinese People's Liberation Army has leaked to the world. Obviously, there's got to be a reason. They haven't called attention. They haven't given, any kind of a recipe for how to extract the extraordinary data from this image that you're going to see shortly, but we will. So just kind of take a deep breath and be prepared for an amazing adventure. This is the image from, I think, the left stereo pan camera on the rover, on Jade Rabbit. And rather than make you wait till the very end, I thought I would pop this in right at the very beginning. This is the lander. Sorry. I don't really like this for the laser. I'll use this for the laser instead. There we are. Let's go back. And this is solar panels, camera masts, instrumentation, rocket engines, landing struts, gold mylar to protect it from the heat of the moon during the, or heat of the sun during the full noon on the moon. Peekaboo of the Chinese flag at the very left or the right side of the image. But it's this stuff which is stunning, which should not be there. And if you look carefully, you'll see there are vertical and horizontal striations. There's a geometry here. There is obviously stuff on this side of the screen, and there's not much, if anything, on this side of the screen. And all of this will be explained in due course. But frankly, if you know what you're looking at, this has got to be one of the most astonishing images in space history. Because all this stuff above the moon, with all this geometry, should not be there. And it certainly should not have been revealed to the world casually by the Chinese government media putting it out in every possible web connection and television show that they could reach during the previous, 3 or 4 months. So moving on, this is telling me, who has been watching NASA very carefully since I was, as Robin said, employed by Cronkite and CBS News to do that. And then later I was a consultant to the agency, and I was commissioned to write a book on space astronomy from Goddard. And I've got to say that as you look at these two space programs, the United States and China, unfortunately, China is in the ascendant, and NASA and the United States is not keeping time. We're not doing any of the things that one would expect us to be doing if, in fact, we were watching a major global power take what we found 50-some years ago and suppressed, when I say we, I'm talking about NASA. So in that political climate, what the Chinese have done is even more extraordinary, because they're basically on the verge of telling the world, this is what the Americans found decades ago and didn't tell you about, much to the shock of their citizens who believe that their government does not lie, tells the truth, shows everything to everybody. At least that's what the propaganda says. And that it's the Chinese who have gone and done something stunning, something absolutely geopolitically extraordinary. And we are watching the opening of this intricate four-dimensional chess game, the conclusion of which tonight I cannot tell you. I don't know where this is going to lead. I do know that the Obama administration has put in place certain technological tools to allow us to go and join the Chinese as full partners in prosecuting what this means for civilization. But again, I'm going to save the political stuff and some of the analysis for the very end, because I do want to get to show you the data. So we have Chang and Jade Rabbit on the moon, landing here on December 14th in a place where no human expeditions, either unmanned or manned, have landed for the last 50 years. A completely unknown new part of the moon to explore. These dark areas here and here and here are what we call the Maria, which were named after seas back when Galileo and his descendants used telescopes to look at the moon, realized it was a world, it was a planet like the Earth, but it looked a little bit different, and that little bit difference ultimately resolved to the fact that these seas do not hold water. They are airless and dry, totally bone-dry lava fields, which apparently have upwelled from the interior of the moon after some major lunar global cataclysm, which punctured the crust and allowed internal mantle lavas to upwell to the surface and spread out in these various basins that are now called Mare Tranquillitatis, Mare Imbrium, Oceanus Procellarum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is Jade Rabbit in the moon, outlined in those dark maria, with his mortar and pestle, busily making elixirs for immortality. Now, the intimate wedding of these ideas in the Chinese mythology behind Chang, and in fact their entire unmanned lunar program, tells me that we're looking at multiple levels of a plan which could ultimately wind up with the human race learning a lot more in very short order if we find ancient libraries and records and some kind of electronic documentation, the archive of an entire ancient, now lost civilization, and the connection of immortality repeatedly in the Far Eastern tradition with the moon tells me, not convincingly, but intriguingly, that that may be the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. For instance, we all know that we live a brief, incredibly brief period of time on the planet, and then we go away. Is that foreordained? Is that in the DNA? Is that in the structure of life? Is that in the nature of human consciousness? Or is that merely an accident of entropy and or the tinkering and tampering with our genetic code by others, to where we are not allowed the lengthy and long lifespans that were normal when whoever lived here lived there? That's one of the things we're going to find out as we progress down this yellow brick road handed to us by the Chinese government. This is a profile of the actual landing by this amazing robot. They originally were going to go to a place called Sinus Iridum, and that translates from the Latin into the Bay of Rainbows in English. And then at the last minute, they did a kind of a bait and switch, and they landed hours early at a place where none of the experts and none of the pundits who were watching the Chinese space program thought they were going to land, which is the Sea of Rains, Mare Imbrium, and they flawlessly touched down in the afternoon on December 14th, inaugurating an interesting series of events that allowed the data I'm going to be showing you to ultimately come back. Now, this is a profile, and the projector still is too far to the left. We've got to move that projector so that it's more over in the center of the screen, because we're missing data over here that can we see it over here? Okay, good. Well, we can, that's easy to fix. You just, rotate the pod, Hal. A little more, a little more, a little more, a little more. Okay, just center it up. Great, thank you. These are the instruments that are carried by the lander, and these are the instruments carried by Jade Rabbit, the rover. And as you can see, mixing our metaphors madly, these things are loaded for bear. They have extraordinary technology on board to do the kind of intensive synoptic science of amazing stuff on the moon, if there ever was amazing stuff on the moon. And lo and behold, there's amazing stuff on the moon, and there they are in an extraordinary position to literally, with 21st century technology, which is light years ahead of what the United States had back during Apollo and during the unmanned missions before it, the ability to analyze and to return data on structures that is going to ultimately, as we pursue this 4D chess game, change the world. I mean, there's no way it can't change the world. The only question in my mind is, how is it going to change the world? And again, I'm going to save the political analysis for the end. One of the first clues that I had that the Chinese were up to something really interesting was in this Chinese media website devoted to the lander, devoted to the landing, called Journey to the Moon. And in the bottom left-hand corner of the website display, there was this object. Anybody recognize what this object is? What kind of pyramid? A tetrahedron. Now, if anybody knows anything about our work, you know that a tetrahedron, as a geometric platonic solid, forms the foundation of our analysis and exploration of something called hyperdimensional torsion field physics. It is a kind of a solid construct frozen in time that is depicting in higher level waveform analysis the ebb and flow of energies in the ether, which is another term for the torsion field. And when I saw this on the Chinese website advertising the mission to the moon, I was frankly quite taken aback, because viewed from the mainstream, viewed from the Chinese papers that the Chinese have published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, both in their own country and in the rest of the world, viewed, given the presentations they make at major scientific conferences around the world, there was nothing connecting this geometric form with the lunar mission. Nothing at all. So why were they doing it? Well, obviously that was the question that I had to ask. Because in our work, the tetrahedron as a frozen in time 3D geometric form that is actually capturing a moment in the ebb and flow of wave energies in the torsion field, in the ether, is the centerpiece of our investigation of this physics for the last 20 or 30 years. For instance, on Jupiter, this is Jupiter, by the way, there is a great red spot, which, by the way, has been shrinking, and that shrinkage is another indication that the physics that we've talked about is changing and changing dramatically in a relatively brief period of time, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. But back when we started our work, we realized that if you were to incorporate inside Jupiter this geometric form, a tetrahedron, it predicted where the great red spot, a vortex which is mathematically related to the tetrahedron, should appear in the southern hemisphere in terms of an internal standing wave structure of energy vibrating in the fluids in the interior of Jupiter, which is liquid hydrogen at extraordinarily high and low temperatures simultaneously, depending upon how far down towards the core of Jupiter you go. So if you see a tetrahedron popping up anywhere, in my mind, that tetrahedron is kind of like a code key. It's kind of like a little acknowledgement of the physics. And again, to see it connected to this lunar mission really made no sense. I mean, here is the great red spot. There is a story that appeared on space.com a few days ago showing how the spot has been shrinking at an extraordinary rate. This is in 1995, this is in 2009, and this is in 2014, and you can see it's going going gone? I mean, a generation is 20 years. This is something which has persisted for the entire history of astronomy. From the time that telescopes were invented in the early 1600s, 1610, 1609, when Galileo looked at the planets, the spot has been visible. 400 years, this thing has been churning and rotating, creating all kinds of interesting wave turbulence in its wake in the Jovian atmosphere, which is incredibly dynamic with storms and various belts moving in various directions at different relative speeds. But the idea that this thing should be a vortex that was maintained by a hyperdimensional connection in the planetary physics, and that now it is shrinking at an extraordinary rate for an astronomical phenomenon. I mean, 400 years is nothing compared to billions and billions of years in the solar system, as Carl used to say. And the idea that in our lifetime it could be gone is telling me profoundly that the dynamics and physics that have maintained this vortex are part of a larger changing hyperdimensional physics of the solar system that we have been talking about for the last 20 or 30 years. So this changing spot, this vortex, which is now a little bigger than the Earth, and it used to be like 3 times bigger than the Earth, it's an indicator, a leading indicator that the background, which everyone keeps assuming, when I say everyone, I'm talking about planetary scientists, is constant, is not. And that is really amazing information and confirmation of the alternative model, the HD torsion field model, that we've been proposing now for, a generation. Well, there's more. If you look at the next planet out, Saturn, this is a Cassini image of Saturn, one of thousands, tens of thousands of stunning images of the Saturn system. What you see in this image is something which was first seen by the Voyager spacecraft back in the 1980s. Around the North Pole of Saturn, there appears to be a perfect hexagon in the clouds. And when we saw this, which was in '89, is when the first images from Voyager were released by NASA. And it took them a little bit of technical talent and genius to arrange to see a view like this. This is Cassini, but the view they from Voyager approximated this because even though they flew by along the rings and the equator, they were able to take northern views and patch them together in the computer so you could get an overhead shot of what the hexagon looked like. So we now know that the hexagon has been a stable feature in this solar system at least since the 1980s. Now that tells me that the physics of the spot and the physics of the hexagon, while related underneath, are actually showing us different stages of the change of the physics. Because as far as we can tell, the hexagon has not changed at all, even though the great red spot is diminishing, shrinking, getting smaller, and will ultimately apparently go away. Well, the closer you look, the more amazing this structure becomes. And anything having to do with geometry in the solar system, this is a false color view, again taken by Cassini, showing this extraordinary 6-sided feature with a huge permanent cyclone, a hurricane, located right atop the geometric pole of Saturn. What's this guy doing there? That's a huge storm that is obviously a tremor in the force, a ripple in the field, something which is not, part of the rest of this matrix. But, and by the way, this is not the entire planet. This is a circle around the North Pole down to about 70 degrees latitude. So this is north, this is 70 degrees away from north, and there you have this amazing geometric form. Now, these are other versions of it. Here's another perspective view. This is another polar view showing in real color what it looks like. And this is a depiction of what we think is going on inside. Because if you take a hexagon and you turn it into 3D, it turns into 2 interlocking tetrahedrons. Surprise, surprise. So you've got geometries on 2 different giant planets in the same solar system, 1 planet apart, which is telling us that something about the fluid physics going on internally inside this planet is just as interesting and as remarkable and as informative as what's going on Jupiter. Now, this is a perspective taken looking over the North Pole. Again, in somewhat natural color, showing us these amazingly straight edges. By the way, the whole structure rotates posigrade in this direction. I'm sorry, this direction. But the clouds marking the hexagon are racing backwards and making the turns at 300 miles an hour. And this has been going on since at least Voyager took the first shot. The other day, out of the blue, that's not good for TV. You always have to think about television in your appearance. That's a, Well, I had left television 30 years ago, and look where I am, what I'm doing. NASA has revealed all of its data in one form or another through various electronic archives. And as computer technology like this laptop, courtesy of Bill Gates, has gotten better and better and better, and the apps and the algorithms have gotten more and more sophisticated, yet more transparent, so that people can just, use the technology without even knowing how a computer works, thank God. Various talented amateurs have used these archives to put together their own versions of the official NASA data. Now, the flyby of Neptune occurred in Voyager's mission in, I think it was August of 1989. And thousands of pictures came in and were stored. It's only now, with the rise of the web, the internet, social media, that amateurs can actually talk to each other. And because NASA has carefully posted all this stuff on their websites, they can download these images that are black and white originals. They can composite them. They can make color, because the images were taken through red, green, and blue filters, so the color would be available. And they can come up with their own rendition of the various historic flybys and encounters that NASA has given us over the last several decades. Well, this was done by one amateur astronomer in the last several days, and what he did was he focused on what you can see around the south pole of Neptune. As the spacecraft flew by, it flew in over the North Pole, curved down, and receded from the planet, and then looked back. So you're looking at a crescent Neptune with the sun way down here in the center of the solar system, several billion miles away. And this little crescent right here is Triton, the largest moon of Neptune. And yes, these things are rings. Now, if Voyager had had the technology we have now for space imaging, this picture could have been generated all as one click, one picture. Instead, this amateur astronomer had to take the images from the rings, the images taken of Triton, the images taken of Neptune, and put them all together in a mosaic such as you would have seen if you were riding on the spacecraft, or if you actually had the technology on Voyager to take such an image instantaneously. So I want to be careful in how I represent this, because it's real data. It's really what you would have seen, but it's a picture that Voyager itself did not take. It required the elements all put together into one final dramatic, and the stars are from one of the astronomy programs of where the stars would have been, based on the trajectory and JPL's computer record of the flight path and all that. So everything is real. All the Neptune stuff is real. The stars are part of a background astronomy program to show you, if you'd had really, really, really good eyesight, what you would have seen as the spacecraft flew by in August of '89, this distant planet that is now technically the farthest known planet from the sun. Pluto having been demoted in a very bizarre historical sequence, which we will not have time to go into now. But if you guys invite me back next year, I'll tell you all about what's going to happen with Pluto, which gets its first flyby in July of 2015, which means we'll just be in late May, a couple of months from seeing stunning new stuff at Pluto. I was asked by my publisher to actually do a paper or an article, or whatever you want to call it, a chapter in a book that's being written and published devoted to the Pluto encounter and the Pluto mythology and all that. And when I get back after this conference, I will complete it and send it to him. And it contains some interesting nuggets that if the Chinese have given us stunning entree to ancient extraterrestrial activities in the solar system on the moon, the Pluto mission could give us stunning confirmation, a la NASA, of the same stuff on Pluto, provided our space agency decides, like the Chinese, to suddenly let it all hang out. And it is bizarre in the 21st century, given our history, given who we are, given how Americans treasure freedom and individuality and telling the truth. That's our mythos. The fact that it's a Chinese government which is beating its hands down in the truth game. And that is not good in the short term, but it could be very exciting in the long term because, frankly, as the Founding Fathers knew, if you don't have competing forces, if you don't have an interlocking system of checks and balances, power will drive those in power to do absolutely terrible things in the name of all the things that most people hold dear and sacred, and in terms of their belief system attached to the history of their own nation. It's a really good thing in my mind that the Chinese have exposed the lies that NASA has been telling us for 50 years, because if it wasn't for somebody else on this planet to tell us the truth, NASA would just go on and on and on doing the same thing and expecting the same result, which somewhere in there, there's an allusion to mental faculties and things like that, but we won't go in that direction. What we will do, however, is to go closer to Neptune and show you what they released in the form of data to an outside civilian to put together, that now NASA is saying, oh my gosh, look at that. This person may have found something. And this is what this amateur astronomer, whose name I believe is Rolf, I may have to check that, has found. What he has found on Neptune around the South Pole is a hexagon identical to the hexagon on Saturn. And that has sat in the archives since 1989, and nobody at NASA seemed to notice. Now, I find that, frankly, really amazing, because that's what these people were paid to do. They took all these pictures and put all this data on videotape and archived it so they could go back and look and analyze and generate papers and grad students and funding and all this. And you mean to tell me that since 89, 99, 2009, 2014, over a quarter of a century later, it's a random average guy that finds this stunning confirmation that the same internal HD physics going on in Saturn and Jupiter apparently is also going on inside Neptune. This is a comparison, and I flipped the Neptune hexagon so that you can see the geometry very similar to this geometry at Saturn, and you'll notice you're dealing with a different atmosphere, different opacities, different what they call transfer constants for, convection and the things that make clouds and makes the puffy white clouds that are part of the hexagon visible. But all in all, we have, by the way, the scale is the same, is accurate. So the size of Neptune, which is much smaller than Saturn, the hexagon occupies the same portion of the atmosphere that the hexagon on Saturn does, which tells us that the physics that's generating this geometry, this visible geometry inside, is also scaling proportional to the planet. And you ain't going to hear this out of NASA for I don't know how long. Then this brings us to the sun. Because as I've been saying for many, many years, this hyperdimensional torsion field physics, which is mandating the evolution and destiny of the planetary system we inhabit, starting with our star, the sun, is showing us indications of how this physics really rules the universe. That it's the unified field theory, ultimately, that physicists and astronomers have been seeking for a very long time. Now, in the sun, you have a star, a huge glowing ball of plasma, ostensibly fueled in the center by nuclear fusion, although that could be called into question with these new results. And you have what's called a 11-year periodic sunspot or solar activity cycle that takes 11 years for the sun to build up spottedness, to have coronal mass ejections and flares and prominence activity, and this waxes and wanes in a period of about 11 years with the surface phenomenon moving relative to the equator, which is here, and the poles, which are here, so that activity starts at a high latitude, moves toward the equator, and it peaks every 11 years at 19.5 degrees, which is the numerical equivalent of the tetrahedron, because it is the circumscribed latitude of a tetrahedron inside a sphere with the points, the vertices, depicting where the energetic activity should take place, starting with planets like Jupiter, but ultimately culminating with the sun, which is a star, which is representative of 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. So if this physics is what's really driving everything out there, then our backyard is a microcosm of the macrocosm, and one can extrapolate what we see in nearby objects to objects that we can't see yet, or that we only infer from very limited telescopic or spacecraft data that will get better as the technology progresses and the years unfold. Well, this shows you that inside the sun there must be some kind of a dynamic standing wave phenomenon rooted in the mathematics of the tetrahedron, in the vorticular motions of the plasma in that geometry, and the peak latitude of the activity on the surface at the peak latitude at the peak time of the sunspot cycle is this canonical 19.5 degrees north and south. So you put all that together, and that's the background for this little nondescript figure sitting there on the Chinese website, a tetrahedron, which is shouting something enormous about the Chinese mission that they are not discussing in public. In other words, it looked to me as if what the Chinese were doing was tipping off those in the know that there is this real physics with this at its base. And they were basically connecting what the objectives of this mission were going to find on the moon with the very physics oriented around the tetrahedron based on our own research. This is another diagram showing the location, originally intended location, of the Chang lander, which was supposed to be up in Sinus Iridium, which is this bay of rainbows, that little protuberance sticking out of Mare Imbrium, which is this basin here. In their polar orbit, as they orbited the moon on the afternoon of December 14th, they suddenly fired the rocket engines. They told this thing to land, and it landed here as opposed to here. And that landing site was stunningly confirmatory of everything I have just told you, because the landing site of Chang 3 on the moon is 19.51 degrees west and 44.12 degrees north. In other words, they built into their secret leak by landing at 19.5. Yes, this mission is secretly looking at the hyperdimensional torsion field model. Take that, you guys in the West. No, I'm very serious. This is high-level geopolitical 4D chess. And when I get to the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, you're not going to believe what you're going to hear, but it's on the record. I can point you to sources. This is not stuff we're making up. This is stuff that anybody with a laptop can confirm. So, this, of course, told me intimately that the double tetrahedron's significance of the physics was being communicated to the world by the very choice of the landing site of Chang 3 as a representation to those who knew what they were looking at of the next shoe the Chinese were preparing to drop as part of this larger mosaic of the real solar system, as opposed to the, I won't say fake solar system that NASA has shown us. Let's just say the abridged version of the real solar system. And again, I am blown away that it's a Chinese Communist government doing this, while our guys, who pride themselves on 200 plus years of freedom and individuality, have been steadfastly lying to everybody for almost half a century. What is wrong with this picture? And is what's happening now going to correct it? I'll get into some other implications of the landing shortly, but let's move on. So we've got a landing at 19.5. I love saying that. It's just such an affirmation of what we've been trying to get people to pay attention to for decades. And it's nobodies that did this. This is the Chinese. This is the first images of both spacecraft taken by each other on the 15th of December, a few hours after the landing. This is the lander, Chang 3. This is Jade Rabbit, the little rover, solar panels, wheels, obligatory Chinese flag, parabolic dish antenna, the two cameras on top of the dish antenna, single camera on top of the lander, solar panels, legs, rockets, and lots of instrumentation in both at 19.5. I mean, that's really mind-boggling. Now, all my critics, and I have legions of them, they have been saying for years that I'm just nuts about this, that I'm into numerology and that I'm, obviously hoaxing whatever data I present. I mean, the things they say about me are worse than the things that Donald Sterling said about other people. The fact of the matter is the Chinese rode to the rescue and landed their damn spacecraft at 19.5. So take that, you critics. How do you explain that? Remember, there are only 4 places on the moon where you can land at 19.5. You can land 19.5 east, or 19.5 west, or 19.5 north, or 19.5 south. Now, given that the moon has a surface area approaching something like all of the continents of Earth combined, something like 15 million square miles, what do you think the odds are that you would just randomly find yourself, oh my God, we landed at 19.5. Wow, how did that happen? So, it happened because someone wanted it to happen as part of a larger tale. And I'm not sure what that did. Oh, there we are, okay. This is now a view as Chang was descending. They did an amazing job in covering it live. And I wrote a paper, a very long paper, which Robin was alluding to earlier. It's a thing that took many, many months to put together, which is now on the Enterprise Mission website, enterprisemission.com. Just look for the Chinese paper on the Chang 3 landing. There's a banner on the front page, you know, what the Chinese really discovered on the moon. You click on that, takes you to the paper, and you'll see that the Chinese have been very inconsistent in the things they have revealed. Like, you can't hide the landing site, right? It's kind of naked and out there. But what they did is they misdirected everybody by saying they were going to land here, and they landed here at 19.5. And they didn't announce it until they landed. So they didn't want anybody to know what they were really up to until they actually sprung the trap. The trap leading to what? That's the question. So you're now a few hundred feet above the landing site. There's a 60-foot crater to the north. The lander actually set down about here, as you're going to see. There's interesting features sticking up. This one we'll talk about in great length later. There's a bunch of rocks on the rim of this crater, which are pretty weird. This is part of the lander. This is part of the actual landing legs of the Chang 3 lander. So it's taking a stream of video, sending it back live. The Chinese, to their credit, posted it live. You actually saw these individual frames coming back to Earth live, which for a Chinese communist government was kind of interesting. They'd never done that before. Their space program is immersed behind layers and layers and layers of partial information, some truths. On this mission, they published more hard data about the technology of the robot, Rabbit, and the Chang lander than they have ever published about any of their space activities before. Kind of like part of the, well, if you know what we can do, it gives you an ability to analyze what we have done, even if we don't say anything. So again, we're back to the idea of a social media plan that involves everybody on the planet who understands the potential of what they're seeing as part of the mission. This is now from Hoagland, which is a Chinese website which actually does some really, really interesting graphics. A depiction of the actual lander. Here's Chang over here. Here's the little Rabbit after it was deployed on the 15th. Here's this crater. The thing about this crater is, as soon as we saw the first pictures, it kind of confirmed what the tetrahedron confirmed. This is not your normal unmanned mainstream planetary landing, even though that's how it was billed. There's something else going on. There's something else driving the Chinese to make public what they're making public. And this was that first picture. Thank you. Anyway, was that Morella? Yes? No? Yes. Oh, okay. She obviously has a comment. Okay. So you look out to the north and you see this crater, and all along the rim there were these remarkable objects which, even though they're called rocks by the press and by the media and even by the Chinese officially, they do not look like normal rocks. For instance, they have geometry. They have sharp edges. They have multiple levels. They have little holes, little symmetrical thingies. And their color really is bizarre because it's blue. Who in their right mind would produce blue rocks on the moon? What were the blue rocks trying to tell us? Well, let's move on. It wasn't until, let me see, the 11th of January, which is now almost a month after the landing, that the Chinese released their first really high-res version of a panorama showing what had happened in the ensuing time between the 14th of December and the middle of the first week in January of 2014. And you can see that there are various versions of the little robot moving further and further away as it was captured in various segments of this panorama. This is all the stuff in the foreground is Chang 3, the lander, and here's Jade Rabbit, leaving little marks. You see the little marks left in the soil? And there's the crater behind it. There's all those funny little rocks. Well, the closer we look, the more intrigued I became with the rocks initially, because they just did not seem like they should have appeared to a normal unmanned mission looking at natural geology. They had too much geometry and that peculiar blue color. Now, by the time the Chinese produced this panorama, they changed the color. Now, when I get a little further down the road in the story, I'm going to explain to you what appears to be contradictory behavior. But right here, this was put together by a guy named Ken Kramer, who's at universe.com, did a really good job. And it is a time-lapse color panorama because obviously there are two rovers. The rover was deployed, rolled up, turned around, obligatory picture of flag on the front of rover, then rover moved around to this position where they took more pictures, then it moved over here, then it moved over here, then it moved south. So this is basically a snapshot, a slice in time of the rover's activities in the first couple of weeks after the landing. There is more. If you look very carefully at this portion of the panorama, this is a crater, a very large crater, something like 450 meters across. If you don't understand meters, just to multiply by 3, because a meter is almost a yard. So 3 times 400. This is over 1,000 feet wide. And right over here was something which captured my attention because it looked, for all the world, like a pyramid. A real, honest-to-God Chinese image of a pyramid on the moon. And nowhere has anybody talked about it. There is one line from the official Chinese press agency, which was giving out stories early on in December of 2013. But after that, all reference to the pyramid on the moon, which is right next to the landing. It's literally 130 feet away, 42 meters away, to the southwest of the landing. So my, curious mind, which likes to look into associations and connections and all that, it's one of those Casablanca questions. Out of all the gin joints in all the world at 19.5, what are the odds you're going to land next to a pyramid? And the answer is, of course, none, unless the pyramid was placed at 19.5. The Chinese knew it was there, and that's why they went to 19.5 west, so they could give us this. And if you look closer, as the rover was moving around, these are the deployment rails. She came down here, moved off over here, then moved around to this position and took a picture of Chang. This is from one of the Chinese news agencies, their logo. There's a couple of these. But remember, there's no such thing in China as independent media. The media in China is openly and totally controlled by the Chinese government. Unlike media in some other countries where it's semi-controlled but nobody admits it. You have to do a lot of cross-balancing to get accurate information in other places on this planet. The Chinese basically say, look, everything we're going to show you, we control. We control the horizontal, we control the vertical. Quick, where is that from? Outer Limits. Okay. Anyway, what I was fascinated by is that they took this picture, and right there, just alongside the lander, was this little guy. In other words, from this position here, looking past the lander, which is here, they were able to see this amazing pyramid, which is here. And again, what are the odds that they would just stop accidentally and photograph the alignment of the rabbit, Chang, and the pyramid in a straight line just by accident? Or did they have something else in mind? Well, I think they did, and I think we figured out what it is. But this is the ground track of the rabbit's little rovings all the way down to December 22nd, which is located right about there. And then when they put her to sleep for the 2-week hibernation because of the lunar night, she'd reached this position, and then things got a little more intriguing. As we enlarge this image, you can see more and more of this exquisite pyramid. And if you actually put the two up side by side, I don't know whether I've done this. Let's see if I did. No, I didn't do that. All right. Let me do this. There. Okay. You can see that they are showing the same surface features even though the lighting has changed. The moon takes a month to rotate. So if you take a picture a few days apart, you will see significant shadow movement over days, not hours or minutes as on Earth. Because we whip around every 24 hours, the moon takes a full month to rotate once on the axis. A lunar day is 4 weeks long. It's also the period of the lunar year. If you measure it by its orbit of the Earth, it takes 1 month to go around the Earth, completing its year, and then it starts over again. And that phasing relationship is what produces the 2 weeks of daylight and the 2 weeks of darkness on the moon, where the temperatures can plummet to well over 300 degrees below zero. So there was a great deal of concern that the little rabbit's electronics and its servo mechanisms and the wheels and the batteries and all of that would not survive the first lunar night of 2 weeks length, which began December 26th of 2013. So as this picture was taken, you could actually correlate, as we'll do later on, side by side the features seen in this view, which is at a higher sun angle than the pictures taken looking from the lander directly at the pyramid on that panorama. Moving on, this is the low sun angle view, and you can see that there are various features like this, which looks like a declivity, this, which looks like a base, perfectly straight, beveled, and then you can see steps. You see how the shadow steps, like it was a step pyramid out of Sumer? Now look, on the moon you have a large number of dynamic processes. The mainstream model is you've got a planet. The moon is big enough to qualify as a planet, even though it doesn't satisfy the definition of the IAU about planets anymore. And onto that object, various things fall at very high speed. Meteors, small comets, asteroids, whatever. Every celestial collision at these velocities and energies produces a huge hole in the ground, throws out a huge amount of stuff, which then rains down both nearby and, depending upon the energy of the impact, sometimes hundreds or even thousands of miles away, the secondaries can fly until they also strike the surface. And some of the stuff actually escapes from the moon and into space and winds up on the Earth. And there have now been scientists who have found pieces of lunar rock on the Earth in the Antarctic, which is identical in terms of isotope chemistry and materials to the lunar rocks that were brought back by the Apollo astronauts. So we know that impacts on the moon cause pieces to fly off and some of them to hit the Earth, where they can be found and analyzed and compared. This impacting process produces all kinds of random shocked debris. It does not produce wonderfully symmetric pyramids that look like the miniature version of what's sitting on the Giza Plateau. So the question is, what was the purpose of this object if in fact it is not a random piece of ejecta from the crater behind it, but in fact was positioned here very carefully so that a future civilization would come there and would go inside. It's not very big. It's about 15 feet high and maybe 10 or 12 feet wide. It's about the size of the lander itself. But you can see when you look at it in close-up that it's made of individual blocks. It's not a continuous, smooth, machined or high-tech structure. It appears to have been built out of individual elements, just like the pyramids in Egypt or the pyramids of the Maya that Robin and I have gone and measured with our Accutron technology, or pyramids in China, in the far east of China, in the central deserts of China. There are astonishing pyramids, huge compared to this, but maybe size on the moon is not the same as size on the Earth, and we'll get back to that in a little while. So I'm asking myself, what could the purpose of this pyramid have been, separate from how did the Chinese know it was there at 19.5, and what would the Chinese be doing by landing next to it in December of 2013? Was there anything that they were expecting to happen around this object that would necessitate, if you want to measure interesting things, that you have an unmanned robot on the surface in its vicinity to measure? And the answer is yes. But I'm going to hold off what the yes means for a couple of minutes. My first thought when I saw this and saw the care with which Chinese took the land next to it was it had to be some kind of cairn. Do you know what a cairn is? Cairns are structures usually assembled out of rock, field rock, that are piled up kind of like this thing, which is in Ireland. This is a cairn called the Fairy Castle Cairn. This structure next to it is part of the Ordnance Survey of latitudes and longitudes in the old British Empire. This one's obviously in Ireland. It's got writing on it. It tells you where you are. It's part of a geological survey. It's not ancient. This thing piled up used to be much bigger. A modern version of a cairn that was built by rocks that is over 20 feet wide. Comparable now to what we're seeing on the moon. Except this one is just a pile of rocks. The one on the moon appears very clearly to be much more organized and much more coherent and much more carefully constructed. So, if it's a cairn, cairns by their nature are designed to protect or preserve something for someone else to find. Was it possible, I was thinking as I'm looking at all this, that the Chinese, as part of their intricate and deeply involving moon mythology, involving protagonists like Chang and her pet rabbit, was it possible that in Chinese culture there were hidden traditions relating to something that a previous human civilization left on the moon at 19.5 degrees for humans to find? And because the Chinese are the heirs apparent of that information, they're the ones who either decided on their own to go and get whatever is there, or there was an agreement on the part of the folks that run the planet, the so-called elites, that because of the Chinese connection to the moon and to this treasure, they would have the honor as part of a general consensus behind the scenes to send a robot to the moon to go there and extract whatever information was incorporated or encapsulated in this structure. Again, at 19.5. I can't get over that. I just cannot get over that. Okay, we'll leave those questions for a little while, because I want to get to the extraordinary, shocking details of what the Chinese did as part of this broad front disclosure program or disclosure process. And it involves this image. Remember our little friend? This was taken by the lander camera, called the landform camera on the lander. And it was taken as the rover was heading south from here down toward here, where it parked for the night. They turned her around so you could see the flag on the front. There's the antenna, the camera's on top, and the lunar, vacuum in the distance with lunar surface rocks and other stuff getting smaller and smaller toward the distant horizon, which on the moon is fairly close, although we're at some altitude here above the mean datum of Mare Imbrium, so your distance to that horizon is probably at least 2 or 3 miles. What was it about this picture which was important? Well, this is an overview of the landing site prepared by one of the planetary scientists who has been following the lunar mission of the Chinese very carefully. His name is Philip Stuckey. He's in Canada. He's at a university, I believe, in Toronto. He has produced a lot of interesting papers and books on planetology and planetary sciences, and he's done tremendous work on the NASA archive, cleaning up old NASA imagery, much like that amateur who did with the Neptune data. And it was Phil pulling together all the available information, which showed a track of the rabbit leaving the lander, moving south, pausing on the 22nd to take that picture I just showed you, then moving to this position where it spent the first 2-week lunar night. And after the lunar dawn 2 weeks later, Stuckey then was able to ascertain that they moved the rabbit here, and then here, and then, well, we'll see where she goes next. But the proximity of the rover to the pyramid in this second lunar day got a lot of us who were paying very close attention really excited about what would we see if the Chinese published any real close-ups of the pyramid. Well, guess what? We haven't seen a frame. We got a tease. We got enough to show us that this object is in fact extraordinary, the pyramid I mean. But unlike the official Chinese news agency promise, this is a Google translation of the Mandarin, which produces really interesting, phrases like, according to Chang E3 detector back from the moon to upload images, Chinese scientists around the detector a pyramid-shaped stone, a high and a pit expressed interest. Now, what's interesting is that you can actually figure this out. It makes sense. You know how to put it back into ordinary English. It's obvious that one of the things they were looking at, well, look at the second paragraph. Rabbit, where, was first proposed by scientists, obviously the Chinese guys. It is reported that scientists have screened several interested objectives, include a large stone pyramid southwest about 42 meters from the lander. So in the official press release announcing what the rabbit would do when it survived the first lunar night and began explorations on the second lunar day after its landing, they were fully announcing and intending with great interest that they were going to go and visit this thing and look very carefully, actually you can probably see it better over here, at what it was made of. I mean, they have amazing instruments on this rover. They have the ability to do spectroscopic analysis. They have a little robot arm, which has a gadget on the end called an alpha spectrometer, which is able to measure nuclear reactions so that you can actually gauge what stuff is made of at the elemental level of composition: silicon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, magnesium, cobalt, whatever, all right? Can you imagine if they had actually trundled over and stuck that arm on the base of this thing and been able to telemeter back to Beijing what it was made of? They can actually even do isotopic analysis. In other words, you have two versions of calcium carbonate. Which version is what we're seeing in terms of the indigenous processes on the moon that might have made it? All those questions would have come out of any detailed analysis, let alone close-up imagery taken from a few feet away as opposed to 130 feet. I mean, even if they got only within, let's say, 2 or 3 feet, that means the pictures would be tens to 100 times better than this one. Well, the lunar dawn came, and nothing was ever heard again from the Chinese about the pyramid they were going to explore. Instead, just before the second lunar night, the Rabbit suddenly had mechanical problems. And all the press coverage was, as press coverage of these things always is, was about the emergency as opposed to the plan, the science, the results, the details, the information. The way you sidetrack snoops and people that are asking questions you don't want answered is you give them a diversion. So what the Chinese did, instead of answering the question, what is this thing doing there at 19.5, they gave the world a little psychodrama about the Rabbit maybe not going to survive the coming second lunar night because its mechanical systems had gone awry. It couldn't fold up its solar wings. It couldn't protect the cameras and the other instrumentation from the 300 below zero temperatures at night during the 2 weeks of lunar blackness. And so they completely changed the subject. In the meantime, we're getting more and more interesting imagery out of the Chinese websites, again, made available, but completely unheralded, unsung, unannounced, undescribed. No press conferences, no pamphlets, no press releases, nothing. It's almost like the Chinese had two brains that were working the mission. One, the government position, the conventional Chinese Communist government position, was everything is normal, everything is fine, everything is, copacetic with our amazing historic feat. And another group was somehow manipulating the data and the images to release real stuff which contradicts what the Chinese official position is, but making no pretense to have any press conferences to describe at all what you were seeing. Unless you knew what you were looking for and you knew what you saw when you saw it, nothing from the Chinese would give it away. In other words, it's a stealth social media program indicating, at least to our analysis, that in the Chinese government system currently, there are, as there are in NASA, two groups. And Mike Barra and I have, stolen freely from X-Files, from, Chris, about what we call these two groups. The Roosters and the Owls was the name that Carter used to signify a group in the U.S. government, that Scully and Mulder were constantly at battle with, the Roosters and the Owls. The Owls in the Scully, Mulder venue were the guys that wanted to continue the cover-up of everything in X-Files, and the Roosters were the ones that wanted to blow the whistle and basically blow the doors off and come clean. Well, we've seen this pattern of behavior in terms of NASA. A lot of the data that we have been given over the years has come from sources or from websites which obviously are being carefully fed information leaked from the inside, showing astonishing, amazing stuff. The Chinese apparently have the same two-tiered political infighting going on within the Chinese government. You've got one group, the official position, trying to keep everything just as mainstream and normal as possible. And you have another group, the roosters, that want to basically reveal the secrets and do it by means of putting out data like this. Well, the response from a NASA scientist writing on a website, a well-known, I'm not going to, get too much in the weeds here, but this is not a trivial Western website devoted to spaceflight. One of their key contributors wrote this right after the Chinese press release came out saying they wanted to go and visit the large stone pyramid, which was unlike anything scientists had ever seen. Did you get that part in the press release? To say out loud, officially, that a pyramid on the moon is unlike anything the Chinese have ever seen? Well, it's unlike anything anybody's ever seen. So here was the quasi-NASA response. In other words, the cover-up on this side of the Pacific Ocean is still very much alive. Which brings us back to this. This picture, when I saw it, I had been looking at all the pictures coming in from various sources, from websites, from Chinese television, relayed around the world, from website to website to website, to various aficionados and people who follow space and write about it and blog about it and talk to each other about it and all that. There's a whole community of space enthusiasts that are now able to do this because of social media. And they, of course, were avidly following every wheel turn of the rabbit. Well, all of the early pictures that the Chinese released, they released in a most bizarre and peculiar fashion for that first week, from the 14th up until December 22nd, because they released them as pictures grabbed off a screen in the Beijing Control Center. It would be like you were all reporters, and I'm, officiating over mission control of the Chinese mission, and I put up these slides and show you this picture, and you have to take your camera and take a picture of this picture on this screen with all of the scattered light and the lack of resolution and the uncertainties of the bulb and all this, and this becomes the official Chinese media press release of their first lunar images to the entire world. And this went on for a week, and I described the whole thing in the paper on enterprisemission.com, so by all means, please read it, because there are lots of links and lots of quotes and lots of real people looking at this and saying, what the hell is this all about?
I live on a big round ball. I never do dream I may fall. And even one day, if I do, well, I'll jump off and smile back at you. I don't even know where we are, but they'll tell you we're circling a star. Well, I'll take their word, I don't know, but I'm dizzy, so I'm riding a big round ball. I never do dream I may fall. And even the high must lay low. But when I do fall, I'll be glad to go. Yeah, when I do fall, I will be glad to go. Yeah, when I do fall, I will be glad to go.
Spend all your time waiting for that second chance, for a break that would make it okay. There's always some reason to feel not good enough, and it's hard at the end of the day. I need some distraction. Oh, beautiful release. Memories seep from my veins. Let me be empty. Oh, weightless, and maybe I'll find some peace tonight. In the arms of the angel, fly away from here, from this dark, cold hotel room, and the endlessness that you fear. You are pulled from the wreckage of your silent reverie. You're in the arms of the angel. May you find some comfort here. So tired of the straight line, and everywhere you turn, there's vultures and thieves at your back. The storm keeps on twisting. You keep on building the lies that you make up for all that you lack. It don't make no difference. Escape one last time. It's easier to believe in this sweet madness, all this glorious sadness that brings me to my knees. In the arms
my soul so weary. When troubles come and my heart burdened be, then I am still and wait here in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise